Welcome to the International Broadcast Ministry of No Limits. I am Pastor Delman Coates, and here at No Limits, we want to help strengthen you, encourage you, and empower you to feel God's love and to live your life without limitation. Today's message is about to begin, and I want to thank you for watching and know that I'm praying for you to hear a special word from God as you watch. Come on, let us put our hands together, give the Lord thanks and praise. Come on, church, all of you at home, if you know that the Lord is worthy of all of our praise, that he deserves the glory, and come on, Mount Eden, this is a day of thanksgiving. In light of everything that we've gone through this week, it is good to still be alive. Amen. I want us to get used to worshiping the Lord from home. God is such an awesome God, and he is where he does deserve the praise, the glory, and the honor. Well, if you have your Bibles, I want to invite you to turn with me to Psalm 125. I want to read the entire psalm in your hearing today. The word of the Lord reads as follows. It says, "Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time on and forevermore. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, so that the righteous might not stretch out their hands to do wrong. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good and to those who are upright in their hearts. But to those who turn aside to their own crooked ways, the Lord will lead astray with evildoers. Peace be upon Israel." I want to talk today, church, from the thought, I'm surrounded by the Lord. Come on, look at your neighbor. Say, neighbor, oh neighbor, I'm surrounded by the Lord. Amen. During the invasion of Iraq during Desert Storm, the 2nd Squadron, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Division Regiment, was sent to help Allied troops. But when they got there on February the 26th, 1991, they discovered that an entire Iraqi armored division was laying in wait. They were waiting for them. Between the 2nd Squadron and those they sought to help were landmines and a rough terrain that could prevent them from fulfilling their task. But they pressed on. They pressed on despite the fact that there were enemy forces around them and landmines in between them. They pressed on anyhow. And as they advanced through the enemy fire, most of the enemy rounds bounced off and the drivers avoided a bulk of the landmines. The Americans pushed through 30 Iraqi tanks and 14 armored vehicles with no American losses. In the aftermath of the battle, it was discovered that the reason the 2nd Squadron was successful is because their commander knew that he had called ahead of time for reinforcements. And he knew that there was friendly fire surrounding the enemies who were around them. I need y'all to get this. When it appeared that our troops were surrounded by the enemy, the truth was that the enemy was surrounded by our backup. And our guys were able to win because the enemy that seemed to surround us was really surrounded by those on our side. That happens, church, not just on the battlefield, but it also happens in life. There is nothing worse than feeling engulfed or surrounded by the challenges and the circumstances of life. Amen. There's nothing worse than feeling surrounded by financial hardships, health issues, and family challenges. And when we feel overwhelmed and on the verge of being conquered, we can find solace in the fact that the enemies, the trials, and the troubles that surround us are ultimately surrounded by God. Did you hear me, church? Because someone listening today feels surrounded. surrounded by debt obligations and bills that are up to your neck, surrounded by fear because of a negative report from the doctor, surrounded by one trial after another. But despite our circumstances, we have a hope, a trust, and a confidence and a way through it all because we are surrounded by God. I need y'all to get this here. Whenever we feel that we are surrounded by circumstances that just might overwhelm us, we can rest assured in the knowledge that our circumstances are surrounded by God. And just as the American snipers surrounded the enemy that had surrounded our ground troops, we are encircled by an invisible power, a heavenly arsenal, and a holy force that provides us divine protection from our problems. This is what the psalmist is underscoring in this 125th Psalm. Psalm 125 belongs to a genre of biblical poetry called the Songs of Ascent. Some scholars believe that the Songs of Ascent were written by the Israelites upon their return from exile in Babylon. They had been humiliated during the destruction of Jerusalem as they were carried away in bondage and captivity into a foreign land. They have had their sense of security taken from them. Israel has grown up in exile, and they now know that the world is a dangerous, vulnerable, and insecure place. But the fact that life is hard and issues will arise that challenge our very being does not stop them from praising and worship the Lord. I need y'all to understand this. In the mind of the people of Israel, it was God who preserved and protected them while they were in exile. It was God who provided for them when they were cast out and cast down. It was God who set them free and allowed them to return back to their homeland. And so these formerly enslaved people returned to their homeland singing these songs of ascent. These songs on how they made it through, these songs on how they made it over, these songs about who brought them through. These songs are not unlike the songs that our ancestors sung, songs like How I Got Over. My soul looks back and wondered how I got over. Songs like We've Come This Far by Faith, leaning on the Lord. Songs like If It Had Not Been for the Lord who was on my side, where would I be? The psalmist doesn't allow those who want to do them in get them down. They move forward nonetheless because they are convinced that those who trust in the Lord, according to this text, will never be moved. The text says in verse 1, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. It may have appeared that they were surrounded by the devil. It may have appeared that they were surrounded by problems. It may have appeared that they were surrounded by insurmountable obstacles, but they were ultimately surrounded by the Lord. They could be confident in the face of their trials because there are 4 assurances that I want to share with you today that God provided them then and us now whenever we feel overwhelmed by the enemy and overwhelmed by life's challenges. First of all, when we are confronting life challenges, we are surrounded by God's promises. Somebody say, I'm surrounded by God's promises. The return from exile was seen as a new birth of freedom for these returning exiles. One could argue that the Songs of Ascent reflect the faith of a people resistant to being mistreated, dominated, and terrorized by the likes of the Babylonians. They are through it. They are through with Babylon. They are now returning to their former homeland in Jerusalem. But a return to Jerusalem is not just a homecoming. It is a return and a reminder to the people of God of the promises that God had made them. I need y'all to get this. They are not just returning back to a physical space. They are also being reminded of the promise that God gave them and their ancestors. ancestors, God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. God didn't tell them, his people, that they would be exiled, but as his descendants are returning from exile, they now remember the promise again that God had made to Father Abraham. God told David that through his lineage a Messiah would come. He did not tell him that before the Messiah would come, his beloved Jerusalem would be destroyed. And yet, even though there was exile, and yet, even though they were exported to Babylon, the people returned to Jerusalem, still waiting on the promise that God had given their people. Listen to what the writer says in the first 3 verses, but pay a close attention to verse 3. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people both now and forevermore. The scepter, here it is, the scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. I need you to get this. The reference to the land allotted to the righteous is a direct reference to the centuries old promise that God had made to the people of Israel. When they saw the mountains as they are returning to Jerusalem, they were reminded of the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are reminded of what God said to David and the rest. They saw the mountains and remembered that they were surrounded by the promises of God. And I don't know who needs to hear this today, church, but I want to tell someone listening today that you too are surrounded by the promises of God. I need you to get this here, that even as you are returning from a place of exile, and even as you are thinking about trial and trouble and oppressors or haters on every side, God wanted me to declare and to remind you that you are surrounded by a promise that you're going to be the head and not the tail. A promise that you're going to be blessed in the city and blessed in the field. A promise that you're going to be blessed in the morning, blessed at noon, and still blessed in the midnight hour. Is there anyone listening who can thank God that I am surrounded by a promise from God? 2 Peter 1:4 says, by which we have been given, he has given us an exceedingly great and precious promise, that through these you may be partakers of the divine nature. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for your good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. The psalmist tells them then and us now that the weapon of the wicked will not outlast the promise of God. I need y'all to hear this. He is telling them that the weapon, the strategy, the tool of the adversary that was formed against them will not outlast the promise of God over their life. And I want to tell someone listening who's going through foreclosure, who's going through divorce, who's dealing with a layoff, who's dealing with sickness, that your storm will not outlast the promise that God has ordained and spoken over your life. God had promised his people land, and nothing his adversaries could do could reverse the promise of God. Somebody ought to shout right there. Somebody ought to thank God that the Lord has a promise with your name on it, and there ain't nothing that the devil can do about it. Whew. I like this because it tells us that when God has made a promise, that promise is perpetual. That nothing that we face can stop the promise that God has spoken upon us, and that is God ordained. There is no plot, no plan, no strategy, no attempt of the devil that can prevent or hinder or obstruct or cancel or nullify or exempt the promise of God from coming to pass in your life. The text says that God had picked the promise for the righteous. He had handpicked, ordained a promise for the people of God, which should be an encouragement to someone today, that God has handcrafted, that God has custom made a promise for your place, for your person, for your predicament, for your position, just for you. And there is absolutely nothing that no hater, that no landlord, that no manager, no co-worker, no racist, nor bigot can do about it. Is there anybody listening who can thank God that there's a promise over my life? He may try to prevent it, but it won't work. He might try to stop it, but it ain't gonna happen because God has already promised it. So whenever Israel is up against the challenge, up against the wall in front of them, all they had to do was to remind themselves of the promise of God. And I want to speak to someone listening who is being weighed down by depression, and someone else listening who's been weighed down by anxiety. You are worrying about things in your future that have not even happened yet. God wants me to remind you of the promise that he has previously made. They were surrounded by God's promises. And when we are sick, we got to remind ourselves of the promise that we are healed by his stripes. Amidst financial harm, we've got to remind ourselves that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness of the world and they that dwell therein. When we are lonely, we've got to remind ourselves of God's promise that I'll never leave you nor forsake you. I'll be with you to the end of the world. Someone needs to be reminded that despite your problems, despite the bills, despite the legal issues, that there is no weapon that's formed against you that shall prosper. It might get formed, but it's not going to work. That weeping might endure for a night, but joy is coming in the morning. And if you can just hold on and hold out, joy is coming in the morning. When we are surrounded when we are going through challenges, we are surrounded by God's promises. But secondly, we are surrounded, according to this text, by God's peace. The psalmists had lived in turmoil in exile. They were carried away in the aftermath of a war. They lived in a culture of slavery and segregation, and they were freed only after war with the Persians and the Babylonians. It had been a long time since they had known true peace. It had been a long time since they had been in the city of Shalom, Jerusalem in Hebrew. The experience of the Israelites is really all of our experiences. Many of us have struggled to find, to get, and to keep our peace. Come on here. The greatest struggle for many of us is peace in our homes, peace on the job, peace in our relationship, peace in our family units, and peace in your mind. You can have a whole lot of stuff. You can have a whole lot of money, a lot of material things, and still not have peace in your mind. And the great fight for many of us is the fight that's going on inside of us, the fight for peace. But the psalmist here says in verse 5 that the believer is not only surrounded by promises, I feel like preaching, that we are also surrounded by peace. The text says, peace be upon Israel. Notice that the psalmist rejoices over the peace of God at the same time as they are facing the threat of their enemies. I need y'all to get this here. Therefore, that suggests that while the enemy is plotting his attack, God will show up in the valley and be their peace. The psalmist understands that real peace is not the absence of problems, no. But rather real peace is that God will give you an inner calm in the midst of your problems. That's real peace. Real peace is not the absence of struggles. Real peace is when you can go through a struggle and still chill. Real peace is when you can have a foreclosure bill on your table and still be relaxed. Real peace is when you know that you're dealing with some marital problems and still be able to sleep at night. Jesus said in John 14:27, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you, but I don't give you the peace that the world gives. Y'all not here. The Puritan Thomas Watson said Jesus Christ prayed for peace, but he also paid for peace through the shedding of his blood. The Lord's peace does not mean the absence of conflict, the absence of tension, the absence of arguments, the absence of disagreements, the absence of trials. That would be a false peace. The Lord's peace is a peace, a presence of comfort that comes from knowing that you've got backup and support when the tension comes. It's the inner peace of knowing that God gives us when we go through things that might otherwise cause other people to fall apart. Peace is the great inheritance given to the believer as an inheritance, as an heir of salvation. Yes, when you get saved, when your name gets written in the Lamb book of life, when you put your name, when your name is written in glory, we are given a peace. When we commit to God, he surrounds us with his peace. That's why Paul said in Philippians 4:7, may the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind through Christ Jesus. The psalmist spoke about this kind of peace in Psalm 23 when he said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm going to still be chilling. I'll have no fear, for thou art with me. Have I got a witness here? Being in a fight and having no fear that makes it possible to endure. Y'all not here? You ever been in a fight but not have to worry because you know you had some backup? That's the best kind of peace to have, when you don't have to worry how big the bully is and how big the adversary is, because you know that you got some boys that are bigger than you. I want to tell somebody listening that the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost are bigger than any trial and trouble that you can. Is there anybody listening who can bless God, who can lift up holy hands, that although things are chaotic and unstable, you can praise God that he gives you a peace? Lord have mercy. When others are losing ground, he'll give you peace to keep it together. When others are falling apart, he'll give you peace to be content while others are still unhappy. It is a peace that passes all human understanding. People will know you're dealing with cancer, and people will know you're going through a divorce, and they'll wonder, how can she show up to work smiling? And how can he show up to work smiling? It is because God has given you a peace on the inside. Have I got a witness here that the world didn't give to you, and the world cannot take it away? When God gives you peace, you'll be able to keep it together when others are cracking under the pressure. They can't sleep, they can't go to bed, they losing weight, but here you are dealing with the same legal issues and family drama and financial problems, and you're still able to thank and give God praise. That's peace. God's peace enables us to hold on when others are inclined to give up. Jesus goes on to say, peace I leave you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give you. So let not your heart, someone listen here, let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Are y'all listening here? Thirdly, when you are facing attack, remember God's promises. Remember, we are surrounded by God's peace. But thirdly, when you're facing attack, you got to be reminded that we are surrounded by God's protection. Can the church say protection? Those of you at home, I want you to type in the chat, I'm surrounded by God's protection. Come on. Come on. If somebody's next to you, just look at them, prophesy to them and say, you are surrounded by God's protection. These Songs of Ascent, originally sung by former slaves, exiles, were later sung by their progeny as they were making their way to offer sacrifice to God, the God of their ancestors. This psalm is considered a pilgrim song, And pilgrims would sing these songs on their journey to worship, to prepare their spirits for worship. Well, I'm working on something. As well as to prepare their minds for the long, arduous, and dangerous trek up ahead. The road to Jerusalem could be very dangerous. As reflected in the parable of the Good Samaritan, remember, the road from Jericho to Jerusalem was populated by robbers who would accost people on their way to worship. And so consequently, these pilgrims would sing this song in preparation for worship. But it also was a prayer to ask God for covering and protection. I'm working on something. So here it is. As they are entering the city of Jerusalem, they notice that the city is surrounded by mountains. That is why the psalmist says in verse 2, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. On the east side of the city, there was the Mount of Olives. On the south side of the city, there was the Hill of Evil Counsel. On the west side, there was the ridge beyond the valley of Jehoshaphat. And on the north side, there was the high ground of Scopus. And so, if the city was ever attacked, the invaders would have to march through the arduous and the dangerous inclines of the mountain ranges that protected the city. Y'all not here. If the devil ever tried to attack the city, they would have to go through the mountains. And so the psalmist says that as these mountains surrounded Jerusalem for protection, so the Lord surrounds and protects his people. Y'all missed your shout. Whenever Satan attacks the believer, he must go through God first in order to get to you. Y'all missed it. Whenever the devil just has a consideration to attack your life and to attack your family, he's got to go through God first. God is our first protector. God is a God of protection. And in a world that is dangerous and unsafe by day and by night, in a world where we deal with so much uncertainty, it is good to know that the Lord protects us from things that we're aware of, and he withholds some things we're not aware of. And while we try to do our best to avoid catastrophe, and while we try to avoid life's pain, the fact remains is that in this life you will have some tribulations, but you don't have to be afraid. Do not be dismayed, because we are safe in the master's arms. It may look like we are surrounded by problems on every side, but we are in fact surrounded by God's promises, surrounded by God's peace, and surrounded by God's protection. Psalm 91, 11 and 12 tells us, for he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all of your ways. In his hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. God is a God of protection. I see y'all ready to go home, but there's one final assurance. There's one fourth and final assurance that God gives us when we're going through. Let me see if y'all remember the first three. We are surrounded. Have I got a witness here? By what God's promises. We are surrounded by God's peace. We are surrounded by God's protection. But fourthly, the fourth assurance we have when we face challenges is this: we are surrounded by God's power. Can the church say power? This entire psalm is a testimony to the power of God. I want you to listen closely to verse 3. It says, for the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to you, to the righteous, so that the righteous might not stretch out their hands to do wrong. This reference to the scepter is a reference to the power of the kings. For example, in the story of Esther, Esther could not go before King Xerxes until he extended his scepter towards her. The scepter stood for the power of the king. So the psalmist here says that the scepter, this symbol of power, this symbol of wickedness, is impotent in the face of the power of God. The secular scepter is impotent in the face of the power of God. Listen here to verse 3. The scepter of the wicked shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous. The key word here is rest. The reality of wickedness will not remain or rest on the righteous. The evil, the pain, the suffering will come, but it's going to pass. Y'all not here. The evil, the wickedness will come, but it will not stay. It will not rest on the righteous. It does not mean that problems won't come, but it means that the problems will just be temporary. The witness of our faith is that God's power has broken the power of the evil one, defeated the power of sin, and loosed the shackles that would oppress the people of God. And when we are facing trials and tribulations, God's power is our protection. And I want you to know that God surrounds you with his power. I don't care where you are. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you are going through. You can rest assured that you are surrounded by the power of God. 1 Peter 1:5 tells us that we as God's people are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. We're kept by God's power. Somebody say, I'm kept. I'm kept. You think you are kept woman, Lord. Just think about being a kept believer. Have I got a witness here? The psalmist discovered that even when you're surrounded by hostile forces, you can look to the power of God. You can look to the power of God. That's good news. Because it may look like you're surrounded, but you're really surrounded by the Lord. Is there anybody listening who can shout and thank God? And your testimony is, it might look like I'm surrounded, but I'm ultimately surrounded by you. It might look like I'm surrounded by devils, but I'm surrounded by, it might look like I'm surrounded by sickness, but I'm surrounded by you. It may seem as if I'm surrounded by bills, but I'm surrounded by you. Whoa. Glory to his name. We're surrounded. Somebody shout, I'm surrounded. Come on, say it again. I'm surrounded. We're surrounded by God's promises. We're surrounded by God's peace. We're surrounded by God's protection and God's power. And when I think about the fact that we are surrounded by the Lord's presence, what comes to my mind is the idea as I close, that when we face life's challenges, we don't have to despair, because all things are working for our good and for his glory. Do you hear me here? I want to tell someone listening that you can rest assured, because all things are working for our good and his glory. As I close, I'm reminded of the story told of a king in Africa who had a close friend with whom he grew up. The friend had a habit of looking at every situation that ever occurred in his life, either positive or negative, and responding by saying, this is good. Well, one day the king and his friend were out on a hunting expedition, and the friend accidentally fired the gun and shot off the king's thumb. And after examining the situation, the friend remarked, as usual, this is good. The king replied, no, this is not good. And he proceeded to send his friend to jail. And a year later, the king was hunting in an area that was populated by cannibals. Yeah, and they captured the king and took the king to their village. And just before they got ready to eat the king, the cannibals noticed that the king was missing a thumb. And since they were superstitious cannibals, they believed that you should not eat anyone who was not whole and who was not perfect. And so they untied the king and sent him on his way because the king was missing a thumb. Well, as the king returned home, he remembered of the event that had taken his thumb, and he felt remorse for treating his friend the way that he did. And so he ran immediately to the jail cell to release his friend. And he said, "Friend, you were right. It was good that my thumb was blown off." And he proceeded to tell the friend all that had happened. And so he said to his friend, "I'm so sorry for sending you to jail for so long. I'm so sorry. It was bad for me to do this." But no, the friend replied, "No, it is okay. This is good that you sent me to jail." And the king said, "What do you mean it is good that I sent you to jail? How could it be good that I sent my friend to jail for a year?" And the friend replied, "If I hadn't been in jail, I would have been out there hunting with you when the cannibals captured you. And since I got all of my fingers and all of my toes, I would have been eating." Church, I want to tell you that when you're going through, we may not understand why, and we may not understand how, but when we consider how we got through it all, we ought to thank God that we're surrounded by God's promise. And we are surrounded by God's peace, and we are surrounded by God's protection, and we are surrounded by God's power. Is there anybody listening who can say, "This is good"? Have I got a witness here? God sees what we can't see. Have I got a witness here? Just when it looks like you're surrounded by enemies, rejoice, because we're surrounded by the Lord. Come on, put your hands together and give the Lord praise today. If you're blessed, come on, Mount it right where you are. I want you to thank God right where you are that this is good. This is good. God sees what we cannot see. And what we need to know is that when it seems as if we're surrounded, we can rejoice knowing that we are surrounded by the Lord. Hallelujah. Amen and amen. In the 17 years I've been pastoring, there is one area that I have found in which people consistently struggle. That is in establishing a daily routine to spend time in the presence of God, something I believe is so critical to growing in Christ. To help you begin each day with the Lord, I have developed the No Limits Daily Devotional email that is available to you for free. This devotional contains a Bible reading, some commentary, and a closing prayer. It is a great way to start your day in communion with God. Request to begin receiving your free devotional emails right now at delmancoats.org. That's delmancoats.org. Thank you in advance for signing up, and I pray it helps you live each day with no limits. Join me as we travel to Egypt and Dubai in the spring of 2023. Together, we will explore the Great Pyramids of Giza and learn the hidden history of one of the world's greatest ancient civilizations. We will cruise the ancient Nile like the pharaohs once did and disembark at iconic sites such as the Aswan Islands, the Valley of the Kings, and the famous Egyptian Museum of Antiquities. And after we've explored Egypt, we will head to Dubai and explore this great modern city. This is truly the trip of a lifetime, and I hope that you'll join me on this journey. Go to delmancoats.org for more information and to register. But don't delay, as space is limited on this tour. I want to thank you for watching today, and I'll see you right here next week for a new episode of No Limits. I am so glad that you took the time to watch this message today. If you have been blessed by this outreach, I'd like to ask you to become a partner in this ministry so that together we can reach the world for Jesus Christ. My heart is to reach people just like you all around the world and to tell them that God loves them and wants to empower them to live a life with no limits. Your financial investment in this ministry will enable us to spread the good news of Jesus Christ around the world so that more people can be inspired and encouraged. Will you help me to reach those people? Will you join me in empowering the lost and the forgotten? Will you be my partner as we teach people to truly live a life with no limits? To make a donation safely and securely, go to our website at delmancoats.org. That's delmancoats.org. And look for the donate button on the top right of the homepage. Thank you in advance for your support and for becoming a true partner in No Limits. Your partnership and financial gift will help us impact the world by bringing hope to those who need it. Your generosity today is a reminder of the goodness of God. Thank you again for watching No Limits with Pastor Delman.
The preceding program was brought to you by the faithful supporters of No Limits and Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland.